Global AI spend is projected to hit $1.5 trillion by 2025 and cross the $2 trillion mark a year later. Hyperscalers are pouring massive capital into new data centers, and utilities are scrambling just to keep the lights on for them. Yet for all that capital, the yield is fracturing. Half of all generative AI projects fail after their proof of concept phase due to escalating costs and bad data. Meanwhile, 63% of security breaches now start with identity-based attacks that traditional firewalls cannot block. The true cost hides in the defensive spending deployed to mitigate these harms. When the SEC fines a company up to 1% of its revenue for market volatility caused by deepfakes, that money is categorized as compliance. In reality, it contributes to a $7 trillion annual drain of defensive capital, spent entirely on managing system fragmentation. Corporate strategies focused on cybersecurity and regulatory compliance are required to keep a business running, but they are mathematically incapable of reversing a $7 trillion leak because they only measure the visible risks. There is an entirely separate, unmeasured balance sheet. An AI engineer working 60-hour weeks loses 2.5 years of life expectancy to burnout and time poverty. The caregiver holding their household together loses 1.8 years. None of this lost labor force participation appears in a corporate talent strategy. This photograph shows the Colorado River, a massive physical watershed that serves as the unmeasured cooling substrate for data centers across the American West. When a watershed is depleted to cool these servers, the surrounding ecosystem loses 4.1 years of vitality. That physical asset failure is absent from the balance sheet. Ignoring these metrics destroys market value. The human capital management software sector recently saw a $50 billion erosion in market cap. Companies like Workday and Paycom dropped because AI automation reduces the very human headcount that drives their per-employee revenue models. A ledger that treats humans and watersheds exclusively as expenses to be minimized, rather than assets to be cultivated, guarantees its own collapse. Global systems currently rely on fragile choke points. TSMC holds 67% of global compute, SWIFT settles every cross-border payment, and 3 credit bureaus fragment the identity of 8 billion people. Governments attempt to secure these bottlenecks with massive spending, like the $39 billion allocated in the CHIPS Act. These concentrations of power do not have to be liabilities. If we stop treating them as extraction points, TSMC's compute density becomes an anchor for distributed processing, and SWIFT's monopoly becomes an anchor for community-verified settlement. This requires a new architecture, the anti-surveillance network. Instead of centralizing information to extract patterns for profit, data never leaves its source. It witnesses presence, confirms it, and destroys raw personal information. By keeping data localized, geographic compliance obligations become a built-in asset, allowing hyperscalers to provide hidden sovereignty by securely holding the local compute substrate. When raw data is inherently unextractable, the target disappears. You eliminate the baseline requirement for billions of dollars in defensive cybersecurity spending because there is no central honeypot left to steal. To run this decentralized network, the underlying economic engine shifts to a mechanism called bidirectional presencing. Here, regional power grids act as active financial treasuries, rather than just passive electricity distributors. This diagram shows the initial financial flow. High-density data centers and AI nodes demand massive amounts of wattage to process compute. By consuming power, they anchor the circuit, routing rate payments directly into the utility treasury. Then, the flow reverses. The utility issues watt-to-fiat dividends, where the largest compute consumers fund payouts for the users anchoring the system. Instead of the traditional model that rewards corporate downsizing and headcount reductions, this engine explicitly requires presence. Maximizing your human and environmental network actually compounds the system's total value. The $7 trillion in annual defensive spend represents trapped capital, ready for recomposition through a process called the living and. Shifting defensive budgets into your workforce yields reduced turnover and returns measurable years of life. A $12 million reallocation becomes $47 million in savings. This math scales. Reallocating an $8.4 million ESG budget achieves compliance while healing 42 cubic feet per second of river flow. These small-scale recoveries point toward a massive global reserve. $590 trillion is the cumulative sum of every stolen hour of labor, every erased act of care, and every depleted watershed missing. This trapped value sits alongside $348 trillion in fragmentation debt and $242 trillion in dry capital, waiting for a functional system. Deploying capital directly into these living nodes creates a 36-to-1 multiplier. For every $1 used to close the gap between the ledger and the witness, $36 of previously inaccessible value becomes available. The information age was constructed as an inverted pyramid, a top-heavy design engineered entirely around the extraction of data, labor, and resources. The sovereignty engine corrects the architecture. It rotates downward, turning the living witness, your workers, your consumers, and your watersheds, into the wide, permanent foundation. The organizations that survive the AI era will not win through better algorithms alone. They will win by mathematically closing the circuit, finally uniting the digital ledger with the living world.